Welcome to Embracing Autism IRL, where we provide practical advice, expert insights, and heartfelt discussions to help families navigate the complexities of parenting autism. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Sara M. Donohue, a seasoned family law attorney with over 30 years of experience. Sara has dedicated her career to representing clients in high conflict family law cases, including challenging child custody disputes and contested divorces. As a court appointed best interest attorney, she's been a steadfast advocate for children, ensuring their voices and needs are heard during some of the most difficult family transitions. In today's episode, we'll explore co-parenting strategies and legal considerations tailored to families of autistic children. From maintaining consistent routines to fostering positive communication, Sara will share invaluable advice to help parents support their children's well-being. Sara, we're honored to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you became involved in family law, particularly in these cases with these special needs children?
Okay, well, first, I became involved in family law when I don't want to go too far afield, but when I was graduating from college, I was trying to decide whether I wanted to go get my master's in social work or to go to law school. And so I ultimately decided to go to law school. So it naturally, my leanings naturally, of course, went to family law because I was interested in potentially being a social worker. So that's how I think I got to family law. I've been practicing now, I'm just going to say over 30 years. It's longer than that. I can't believe it when I say it. I don't tailor my practice to any particular client or custody case. They come to you. But of course, over the years, I do a lot of custody work, and as you mentioned, I've been a best interest attorney in many, many cases where I get appointed by the court in cases that are in litigation for custody, where I represent the children and their best interests and make a recommendation to the court as to what I think is in their best interest. Sometimes those cases, the children have special needs, sometimes autism, sometimes other, just other issues, as well as just typical children as well. So, but I, of course, have had many cases come to me where parents have children with autism. I represented someone last year, they had twin boys with autism. They did a fabulous job at co-parenting together, and the case was nicely settled. I presently just got appointed to represent two 8-year-old boys as a best interest attorney, where the parents aren't doing as well with their co-parenting skills, and so as such, the court has asked me to step in and to investigate and make recommendations as to what's best for these boys. So it comes in many different ways, sometimes through private practice, sometimes through appointments. But that being said, I've handled, a number of cases where, we have children with neurodivergent, traits and issues.
Yeah, I can imagine because I know, like, statistically speaking, unfortunately, there is a really high rate of divorce when it comes to parents who are raising autistic children. There was some crazy statistic I read about a year ago that was something between like 80 to 90%, like after there's an autism diagnosis, that those marriages just do not last. And I can imagine the stress has a lot to do with it. But I wanted to ask you, because of that and the fact that you're probably seeing a lot of these clients, I would imagine, what are some important considerations for parents who then have to co-parent these autistic children, especially regarding those child's particular needs throughout this process, the legal proceedings and everything?
Well, I think the most important thing parents need to do is to put their children's interests before their own. It's Sometimes you see, parents want as much time as they could possibly have, of course, with their children, but it's not always practical. It's not always wise. It's not always best for the children, especially children who have some significant special needs. It could be very hard to have. Some couples can, of course. This is not blanket statements, but very hard to have a 50-50 arrangement, or where the schedule is. Sometimes people want every other day. Well, some couples can handle that. I'm not sure if a child ever really can handle that, but that's my bias. But nevertheless, some parents want that, And yet, when you have a child who's autistic, that could be very, very difficult to set up a schedule where every single day, every other day, they're moving back and forth between homes. Now, I do think that there are parents that can do it, but I don't think it's necessarily the majority of parents. And if you don't, if you're in a divorce where, uh, there that is acrimonious and a lot of anger, hostility, uh, and that seeps out on each transfer between with the children back and forth. That's just going to be like not a good situation for your children. Some parents truly can put their feelings about each other at this juncture aside and focus on their kids, but it's not everybody.
So I'm hearing kind of two different things. One is like consideration for the routine and scheduling. I completely agree. Autistic kids in particular have a really hard time with breaking routine and context switching. So the constant going back and forth, the more you can minimize that, honestly, the better it is for the autistic kid. And then I'm hearing, trying to keep things as like civil as possible. Are there any other things that kind of stand out to you from the cases that you've seen that, let's say there's a family listening right now, maybe there's a mom listening to this podcast episode, they're considering, going the legal route. Is there anything that you would kind of recommend in terms of like a specific co-parenting consideration that maybe you see come up a lot in these cases?
I think so, I think it depends on the couple. Okay, I think it depends on the couple. I certainly cases where I'm appointed to represent children where they've found themselves in court in litigation surrounding custody. Um, it's not sometimes one parent is really doing everything appropriately and child-centered, and yet the other parent, due to other issues, due to perhaps mental health issues, due to their anger, due to whatever, can't co-parent well. So it, it's really hard. I mean, when I meet with a client, whether, just generally, I want to listen for how have they done historically? How have they done historically on making major decisions pertaining to their children? Now, in this context, I mean, there are so many decisions that need to be made early on, as to educate what the developmental needs are of the child, the evaluations, the placement in special schooling, medications. It's oftentimes even more than just your uh, family that doesn't have any of those issues. And even in those families that there's no all these additional health and sensitive issues, they may not be doing so well raising their children together. So you have all these very serious, significant things that need to be addressed. And one parent is not necessarily in agreement with the other, yet one parent is making better decisions than the other. So when you look for your counsel, you want them to be someone that, of course, works and does a lot of custody work, but also has had some experience with children, be it autistic or other special needs. So they understand the importance of not just doing a cookie cutter arrangement, but tailoring it to what that child needs. And that may mean that you have to talk to the professional, that the professionals that have been treating the child need to be, you need to speak with them. You need to get their opinions. You need to figure out what's best. And what can happen, unfortunately, is that the treating psychologist, the treating speech pathologist, the treating occupational therapist, if the other parent is in disagreement, they go out and get people to say, well, that's not necessarily how it is. And so then you get into this context of, two opinions, and that's how you find yourself in custody litigation. So the more that you can work together to create a plan together that best address your child's needs, the the benefit is so like more than twofold as to your child and how they're going to do.
So now that you mentioned that situation, it kind of reminded me of a case that comes up often in conversation with other moms of autistic children. Because of that high divorce rate, a lot of moms that I've spoken to are going through that. And one of the common themes that I've seen come out of these conversations is that one parent, typically the father in the cases that I've spoken to, seems to not agree with or want to recognize that their child has a disability, is autistic. And in some of these cases, they actually are fighting like in the courts to try to prevent the mother from being able to bring the child to therapies because they don't believe the child is autistic despite having the professional diagnosis. What can parents do, if anything, in that situation? Do you see that commonly, or is that
That is pretty common. Well, first, some reason for the divorce could be that one parent is, I'm not going to go mother father because it can be both. One parent is recognizing that there are issues like early on, developmentally. The other parent's like, no, no, they're absolutely fine. And over time, though, it becomes more apparent as they get older and older, especially if they've had other siblings where you have some basis of experience to compare. And that begins where I think the problems start, is that one spouse just can't see it, just can't accept it, is in denial, where perhaps the other spouse is just more realistic and accepting to the fact that, okay, our child has some issues, is autistic, has some needs, and needs more than, let's say, if you had another child that you've raised and you know at age 3 what you're looking for, and it's not happening with your second child. That begins, and that's what I've seen, is where the problems can start as to the marriage. And then of course, you know as time progresses, it's critical to be getting the services you need early on. So it just drives a wedge between the parents, and then you find yourself in custody litigation, or divorce first, and then if you can't agree, you know as to, if someone's just not going to accept the diagnosis and fight it, you have to, you can't, it's not, you can't, both parties have to want to settle something. And if one party can't or won't, then you have to proceed in litigation. And that's where you're going to have to go and, use your resources, use the people that know the children, and then show everything you've done, to address these issues and why this is the recommended course. And then you leave it to a judge to decide, what's appropriate, what the appropriate schedule is as far as their living arrangements, and what, of course, how the decision making should be resolved. But if there's a lack of respect demonstrated, in the course of the proceedings, I mean, that really goes a long way. And when you have to go to court, as to trying to persuade a judge why, lack of respect, and also a lack of ability to communicate on these major issues, that maybe one parent has to have the decision making instead of both, which is unfortunate. But if it means the child getting the help they need, and the other parent is just not seeing, or just not willing to approve it, that's what you got to do,
yeah.
unfortunately.
I've heard that like one of the things that you can do, because I feel like a lot of parents feel kind of powerless through this whole process. But I've heard like one of the things that you can actually do is just focus on like record keeping. So just like keeping track of conversations, or maybe certain actions, like if they did deny bringing your kid to therapy or something like that. Are there certain things that parents should or should not do if they are concerned for this kind of, relationship where the other parent might not want to acknowledge their child's autism?
Right. Well, I think when you see patterns of, where there are patterns of disagreement, or where there has been something in place, and then once there's a separation, the other parent's not willing to continue the therapy, continue the medication, continue the extra supports that the child's getting because they don't see it. That's what you know that's what you need to show. That's what, and then that's what also plays out in court as to how ultimately a decision has to be made as to who's going to make those decisions. So I'm not sure if I answered your question because maybe I went off track, but
No, that's good. I was wondering a little bit. We mentioned a little bit about routine, and we mentioned a little bit about the custody agreement. Another part of that, though, is when you get into all the holidays, all the vacations, all those like lengthier things. Like, I know with autism, that can also be a challenge for autistic kids because, for example, they might associate Christmas with this house, and now we have to go to a new house, and that can trigger autistic meltdowns and all sorts of sensory issues and, the whole thing. So, how does I guess how does the system kind of take that into consideration with parents and how it all works together in terms of what's in the best interest of the child?
okay. Well, if you're talking about, I'm not sure if you're saying if we're suggesting what we're talking about is a case in court. Is that what you're suggesting versus?
If it goes, I don't know if it would necessarily have to go to court or if there's some process
I
before
don't know.
that.
I have a hypothetical, but
Yeah.
if a judge is going to, you need to, um, you know, sometimes we have to bring in like the specialists, to address and talk about what this particular child needs. Maybe there's been a specialist seeing this child, let's say, for the past 4 years. That's pretty persuasive. This is what I recommend. This is my opinion. And as I said earlier, if it's in court, you can, of course, someone can bring in an opposing expert to say, well, that's not always the case, which is true, except you have someone that's been working with this child in speech therapy or occupational therapy or psychological therapy, and so that's what a court's going to look at. But also there could be a custody evaluation done. Montgomery County, I'm in Maryland, but you can have, the court can require there be custody evaluations that may try to make it an assessment by a neutral and that person would go out and talk to all the providers and try to make a recommendation as a best interest attorney would after speaking to many people, what is best for this child. Now, if they're not in court, there's other avenues. I mean, there's parent coordinators. Parties can agree to use a parent coordinator that can be either a lawyer that's trained in parent coordination or a mental health professional that's trained in parent coordination that can work with the couple and try to work through these kind of obstacles they're having as to, well, you brought up holidays. I mean, and vacations. All those are wonderful things, but autistic children don't always enjoy that change and don't always like the over. Their sensory system is different. That taking them to a place that's like too overwhelming can really be an awful experience. So these are the things that you have to work through. And I think that if you're going to try to resolve it, without going to court, which of course is always the best avenue if possible, you're going to have to look to some professionals to help you through it. And, a parent coordinator or working with a neutral mental health professional who is trained in the area of autism, behavior, or child development, so on and so forth, and looking to them for some direction to help the couple. But sometimes it just doesn't work.
Is there a difference between a parent coordinator and like a mediator? Is that two different things?
Yeah, it's two different things. A mediator is, you go to it's a neutral third party who is there to assist the parties in reaching a compromise and an agreement. That does not necessarily mean it's right or fair, but that they've both come to a compromise to resolve it. And there's no authority to enforce. Like if the couple says one says I'm not interested, I'm not going to do that. It's over. Like you work with the mediator, couple tries to come to some resolution, and that's that. The parent coordinator is, well, it depends. You can give it depends on the parent coordinator. They're not there to settle anything. They're there if the parents have agreed to see a parent coordinator because um, let's let's say they already have an agreement that says that in the event of an impasse on a major decision pertaining to the child, we will see a parent coordinator to assist us in trying to reach a resolution. It's it's different. The parent coordinator, I think, is more active, more like there to give their perspective after talking to the couple on both, listening to both of their sides, both of their opinions. They're kind of there to say, okay, I've listened to it, but I think that this is the more prudent route. Again, it depends. You can build in sometimes, like that the parent coordinator has the final say. Courts can't do that, but parties can agree to that. But it really depends on what the terms of the agreement are. But they can be very helpful in trying to move it forward and giving some recommendation to the couple. And likewise, depending upon what's in the parties' agreement, if they've agreed to a parent coordinator, uh, and depending upon the language, a parent coordinator can testify in court if they still can't agree. And that's pretty persuasive testimony when you have somebody that was picked as a neutral who's met with the couple and comes in and says, this is what I saw. This is why I think, dad's perspective is the more prudent, and or mom's, and this is why I recommended this. That can be pretty powerful testimony, but it depends what's in your agreement. If you agree within an agreement, don't want to go too far afield, that a parent coordinator is not going to testify, well, then you're precluded from bringing the parent coordinator in. So,
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that kind of stood out to me throughout this conversation is, the process seems to be very much so between the parents, the mother, the father, the couple, the relationship. But throughout this process, does the child have any role? Is there anything that the child gets involved in? Do the parents have to involve them for any process? Does that depend on like their level of autism, their age? I'm just curious.
well, I think that it would depend on the level of their autism. Also, something I haven't raised is that if you find yourself in court in a custody case with children with special needs, it might be really wise to ask for the appointment of a best interest attorney, because that although a lawyer, and they step into they're the lawyers for the child, they are tasked with making recommendations to the court as to what the best interest attorney thinks is best for this child or children. Um, so that's another avenue that one could pursue.
So, I guess just to clarify for the audience, does the child themselves have any sort of say throughout this process, or does that not matter? Like,
Yes.
I mean,
Okay.
not matter, but like, does the court kind of see
Well,
them as
if you have
not
a best interest attorney, they are meeting with the children, and it
okay?
really depends on their maturity, their ability to understand uh, the situation. I mean, clearly,
Okay,
it depends on their age, and if a child is severely autistic, you're
right.
probably there's not going to be like an opinion sought. But if you had a best interest attorney, and the child had what I believe what the term is considered judgment, that they
Hmm.
have a complete appreciation for the situation and are mature. Uh, if the best interest attorney were to disagree with the child, there's an obligation in Maryland I can only speak to, that the best interest attorney has to say, this is what I think is best, but this is what my client feels is best. But
Got
that's
it.
really only comes into play if there's considered judgment.
Okay. Okay. That makes more sense. I wasn't aware that the child had that like intimate of a relationship with the best interest
Oh,
attorney.
very much so. I mean, certainly you try to establish trust as a best interest attorney with a child and let them know that you're not a parrot. You're not there to just voice what they say, because you have to make a recommendation, but that you're very much interested in and want to build trust so they can talk to you about their what's going on within their family.
And from your professional experience and from the cases that you've seen, what piece of advice would you give to parents navigating this in terms of the best way to reduce the load, reduce the stress on that child throughout this process? What is the best thing a parent could do?
Um, if it's necessary to fake it as to your relationship with your soon-to-be former spouse or former spouse, so things are calm and respectful, do that. I mean, it's hard for any child to watch their parents, always barbing with each other, always saying negative things, or being volatile, or speaking down, talking down about the other parent. That's bad for any child, but I think it's even worse for a child, to decipher and to figure out where you have autism or other special needs. So as difficult as it is, keep the peace, keep things smooth, stay on the schedule. Don't be, there's so many things that parents do uh, uh, that that's satisfying to them, but they're not keeping their focus on their child. It's not child centered, and so especially with a child with autism, be on time, follow the schedule, don't deviate from the schedule, have your child know the schedule. Surprises aren't good. It's not good. I mean, they can cause just all kinds of negative reactions and upsets and meltdowns. So, you want to do as much as, on a good day, raising a child with autism is challenging. Add all these other things that in the course of a divorce, and someone's not respecting the schedule, not respecting the parent, all those things only make things worse for a child, with autism.
And if there was just generally throughout the entire process, one piece of advice that you would like to give to the parents listening to this who may be navigating this process, what is that one piece of advice that you would want to make sure that they know?
One piece of advice.
You could give a couple.
No, I thought I just gave a piece of advice.
Yeah.
It's, fly straight. Don't, respect the other parent, respect each other, work together, make plan together, keep things as stable and consistent as possible for your child, and kind of put your ego aside and focus on what's, best for your child.
Yeah. So, the other thing that I like to ask all my guests is our podcast is called Embracing Autism. Everybody has a little bit different of an idea of what that means to them. So, I wanted to ask you, what does the phrase or the concept of embracing autism mean to you specifically?
Okay. Embracing autism in my practice, my family law practice, I would say means recognizing that each child needs are unique, and advocating for custody arrangements that recognize those needs and prioritize stability, consistency, and understanding between the parents. That's what I would have to say.
That's awesome. That's basically exactly what you need for a smooth process. So nobody's stressed out doing all this.
Well, it's very stressful. The best divorces are stressful, but you add other components in a family that are already stressful, and it's really can be quite challenging and awful. So,
Can I ask you, you might not know the answer to this, but approximately what percentage would you say of these cases are just smooth sailing? I would imagine it's a really small number, but I'm just curious. Does anybody just get through it?
I'm just going to say that I also get appointed to do mediation for the court in custody cases. So I'm going to just speak generally about custody work. I mean, and it is remarkable sometimes, but probably not the majority, when some people come to mediation and they like are so like good, they're such good parents in putting their child first and not putting themselves first. It's like I always keep telling them, oh, you're like going to be my, my poster parent for, for my next mediation. I just had one last week and they were just really respectful of each other, respectful of their children's needs. Of course, someone probably wants more than they get, but know that it's best. Knowing that you, when a parent comes and they'll say, I would love nothing more than to have my child with me 50% of the time, but I know that I can't do it because of the demands of my job. I just think that's like, it's so hard because, of course, you want your child half the time, but you also have to be realistic. You have to do what's best for your child. And if people can keep that in the forefront, they will really do much better in the course of their divorce or their custody case.
Well, thanks for that. I wanted to add a little bit of positivity at the end because I know this isn't the most fun topic for people. So, where can my listeners find you or learn more about your work?
Okay, well, I'm with a law firm. It's Stein Sperling in Rockville, Maryland. And of course, we have a web page and can also be found on LinkedIn. But Stein Sperling, Rockville, Maryland. I'm Sara
And
Donohue.
for those of you listening audio only, the website is www.steinsperling.com. I believe you guys also have some social media accounts as well. Instagram Stein_Sperling and Facebook at Stein Sperling. And Stein is Stein for those of you on audio only. Well, thank you so much for coming today, Sara. I really appreciate this conversation. I think a lot of people will learn a lot and get a lot of benefit from this because, as I mentioned, this is a big topic in the autism community. So I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Oh, I really appreciate your having me here, Leah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Thanks.